Okay, so the game is Warriors of God. This is got, I think, the second most votes currently on my request list, so it didn't seem like a bad thing to choose. Granted, I usually ignore those, but this was definitely triggered by that because this is something I've owned, I've played before. When I first picked it up, I was kind of excited, and there aren't a lot of games on the strategic level covering anything in the medieval era, really. And in this case, I was kind of willing to give it a pass on how light it is, just because of the topic matter. And I definitely did enjoy it a good deal. Now, it's what's kind of interesting about it is I guess it's based on a Japanese design. There was a similar feudal Japanese game using a similar system, and that's actually being released now. I probably won't get that whether I like this or not, and I kind of do, simply because the system is kind of the trigger for a game like this. There's not a significant difference, I would guess, between playing something like this with this kind of mechanic in one genre or another, or in one time period or another. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of Granada, which I recently picked up over here. In terms of the level of complexity, etc., it's obviously a more popular game, and for good reason. This one works, Granada doesn't. Anyway, let's take a look at the rules. In both cases, the rules are fairly simple, but in this game, obviously someone paid some attention to trying to get a balanced game and a kind of interesting game. So the basic goal on this is this victory point track here, and you've got a counter on it covering British and French. Oh, by the way, there's two scenarios. I'm going to be playing the Lion in Winter, which is the earlier and I think simpler scenario, even though they offer the 100 Years' War one as the first one. But this one is chronologically earlier, and I think it's a little easier to play. So I'm going to go with this one. It may be a little bit more random, though. But the game is very random to begin with. Okay, so your goal is to get to 30 victory points on this, or maybe it's to get more than 30, but I think it's to get to 30, at which point you win. And they kind of misuse the concept of a zero-sum game, but essentially the victory point chart is a balance. As you get negative, as your opponent gets victory points, if you're in the positive, they are taken away from you. So you're on a scale. If you can get 30 victory points in your direction, you win. It's not really zero-sum. Zero-sum would be if all the victory areas in the board added up to some amount and you were sharing those. They don't really work that way here. In fact, there's an infinite number of victory points because not infinite, but because when you kill people or capture people, you can get points off that. All right, so that's the basic goal here, is to collect victory points. Yay, it must be a euro. Okay, but beyond that, how do you go about it? What is the sequence of play? And what do you have here? Well, you have component-wise, you have a number of these leader counters, which are back printed, usually with another leader for later in the game, to allow the use of the counter mix more fully. You have combat units, etc., that are just numbered, treated kind of like change. You have these little control markers, yep, and some little markers to indicate who's the king, and some gameplay stuff, some special forces. Nothing too exciting there. Region-wise, on the map, there's a couple of different types of markings that are important. This is your normal clear terrain between areas. It's an area control type game. Somewhat easier to move through is river terrain, and then there's these obstructed terrains. There's also overseas routes, which are still considered adjacency in the same way as a land route is. You have places to put your prisoners. It's going to be an impulse-based movement system, so we've got the an impulse track there to take care of that. Comes with a pair of player aid cards, very good quality. Give you pretty much what you need to know for the game, actually, distilled without the rules. So let's take a look at the sequence of play here. In each turn, the first thing that you do is you determine who's going to have the initiative in that turn. And damn, how do you do that? Well, I already got to look things up because even though I've played this and have read the rules just recently or skimmed them, I don't really remember it. Hey, what you do is you each roll a die. Whoever gets the higher roll has the initiative. That may not be the good thing. It's hard to tell. They make it sound like the non-initiative is a penalty, but really it's kind of a mixed blessing either way. The non-initiative gets some bonuses as well. So what you're going to do is each player rolls a die, and whoever gets, hey, they tied. There's rules for ties on the first turn of the game, and otherwise whoever has the initiative will win the ties every time. Now the number of impulses that you get is going to be equal to the lower number on the die, on the pair of dice, plus I think it's 2. Yeah. Plus 2. And that's what the initiative player gets. So let's say the English would win, which they would have in the initial. They would have 5 impulses. And then the non-initiative player gets 1 point less. So the initiative player is going to get an action more during the turn. Okay. Then they conduct the action impulses, which is going to be a movement. Well, there are two or 3 things, depending on what you want to count on a pass as, that you can do on an impulse. One of them is you can move a stack of leaders. And that is based on how many, what kind of terrain you're traveling across. A leader and all his troops can travel across a border. Now, in general, for clear borders, it's 2 leaders can cross. For rivers, it's 3. Like I said, they're a little easier. And for obstructed, it's 1. Across sea, it's a little bit more complicated than that. If it's from an area to an adjacent friendly area, you can move 2 leaders. Otherwise, it's only 1 across the sea. Most of the areas are called contested areas, and they'll have a number in them, which is sort of their value for troops and for victory points. Kinda. It affects those things. But there are some uncontested areas which are really outside the theater and are places where you can grab mercenaries and not much else. Okay. Let's take a look at what happens. Okay, so if you move into an area where an enemy is, a little aggressor marker gets put down to indicate which player has attacked. If you move into an area where the enemy is, you're the aggressor. You're going to have to. The onus of the attack is on your hands, which gives you some slight disadvantages in battle, perhaps. And whatever troops you have with you, pretty much throughout the game, you can't drop off. You can't exchange. They're just assigned to you, and they travel with you. And some of them may be special, which means, hey, you'd really like to drop something off and exchange what you've got, but you can't actually. Okay. Another thing you can do is you can use an action point to remove an enemy control marker, and that's these little discs, which are backside printed, from an area, as long as the number of friendly leaders is greater than the number of enemy leaders plus the enemy control marker, which is to say you need 2 more leaders than your enemy has in the space in order to remove his control marker. Basically, the marker counts as one of them. And the third thing you could do is just pass. That eats up an initiative. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do that if you could remove markers, but you may not want to move all the time. And we may see some of that in my play. Then we go to the battle resolution phase, which is the third action. And this is actually fairly simple. They go through a lot of explanation, and the rules are kind of annoying in this sense. They're written not in the style that I would expect from the gamers, which I thought this was. I see the MMP on it. It may not actually be a gamers. It may just be pure MMP. And I know MMP is kind of branched away from the more, and I don't know how well they've done previously anyway. ASL's well done, but I'm not sure if, but they certainly don't strike me in this as having the same kind of discipline towards rules that the gamers have had in their games. And that's kind of disappointing because this is written kind of like a GMT or a maybe some Ameritrash game in terms of the rules. And it's on this glossy paper with pictures and lots of examples and all kind of stuff that doesn't really help me, but it may be good for some people. Okay, so a battle basically depends on a few situations. The first thing you have to do is the defender has to decide. Well, first thing you have to do is determine who's commanding the battle, and that's based on the number of stars on a leader. A leader can drag troops with him equal to 3 times his stars, and the highest stars or starred leader is going to be the commander in any battle. We'll go a little bit more into these other numbers because this one says combat rating, which is how many dice he kind of gets out of the troops that he's carrying with the maximum. And this is his, I'm trying to think of the word for it, his bravery number, which I think actually you want to be low. Maybe I'm mistaken there. No, you want that high, I think. Anyway, the bravery is sort of his personal combat and his ability within that number of troops that he can actually command in a battlefield, which is his battle rating, how well they'll do. Let's see how that actually works out, though. So each player determines which of his battle commanders is there. You don't have to choose anything except by whoever has the most stars. Then, if the defender's sitting in a territory he controls, actually, if either player is sitting in a territory he controls, they can make it into a siege combat. What that means is that the other player has to win a siege combat against you or leave. It prevents really the main regular battle from actually happening. Okay, so let's say there's a siege as the option, because that's how the rules go. The siege number is going to be the value of an area, which is the Roman numeral on it, plus 3, plus the bravery of the besieged leader. So say him, we'd be looking at an 11 so far. Then we subtract the bravery of the besieging, of the besieger, whoever their commander is, and you also subtract up to 2 points for gunner units if they're in the game. I'm not sure if gunners are in this first scenario, but that's okay. This is an intro to the whole game, really. Okay. That'll give you a number, and that's your target. You have to roll a die to get greater than that number. So obviously, there are times when you just couldn't win a siege. If we're looking at an 11 here, if this guy comes in without gunners, he needs an 8 or higher on one 6-sided die. He's not going to get that. He will lose. If the besieger fails, he has to withdraw from the area. It's not a full retreat, it's a withdrawal. We'll worry about that in a moment. But whenever you retreat, you have to go into an area without enemy leaders, across borders that you could during an action phase, which is to say, your army may have to split up due to the terrain. And if you're unable to withdraw, your leader's actually captured and goes into the prison boxes, and your troops are destroyed. Okay, that's the siege. That's over after one die roll. But let's go to the battles, because battle continues through multiple rounds conceivably. The way this happens is, first there's going to be one round of battle, opportunities to withdraw, and then more rounds. Withdrawal is very expensive in this game, though. Okay, in order to do the battle, you determine how many dice you're allowed to roll in battle. And that's going to be covered, we've got our actions here, that's going to be covered here, isn't it? Yeah. There's all the instructions there, and they're not laid out in a nice chart in a way that's easy to handle, but they are laid out in a simplified manner, I guess. You determine the amount of dice that you're allowed to roll, and that's going to be the lesser of your battle rating, the first number to the left, and the number of troops that you're commanding total. Only your battle leader's command rating works, so this guy can carry 9 troops with him, because he has 3 stars. 3 times 3 is 9. He can have multiple leaders with him, but for the battle, he's only going to roll 1 die. That's for each round of battle. The extra troops can get involved later. Gunners don't count in regular battle, but everything else kind of does. In addition, though, if you have longbow troops, which are a special kind of troop that only the English and the Welsh have, we got little markers for them here. If you have longbow troops with you, then you add to that a number of dice equal to the lesser of your battle rating or the number of longbow troops you have there in the battle. So you could conceivably be rolling twice your battle rating there if you've got a low rating. One thing I forgot to mention, every leader is considered to have 1 unit of regular troops attached to him. There are a couple of leaders who have a longbow picture on them. They're considered to have 1 unit of longbow troops with them. If that unit gets destroyed, the leader is now knocked off the board, and we'll see how that works in a little bit. Okay, whoever has the higher bravery rating gets to add the difference to his die rolls, all of his die rolls. And the goal here is to roll a 6 or higher. You roll as many dice as you have. Each 6 or higher that you have causes a hit to the enemy. A couple little points here. Knights, and this is kind of like Hispania and some other games. When they get hit, they take 2 hits to be killed. But if you hit them with only 1 hit, and the person receiving the hits gets to allocate the damage, they still die. So you kind of want to make sure that you have 2 hits to allocate to a knight when you're taking damage. Knights only get 1 die in combat, and they don't have any other real benefits, so you kind of want to expend them early, I guess, except that your army's a little more powerful if you have knights with it, and it may be hard to build up enough knights in a force. Okay. Now let's go to assigning damage. The player who receives the damage, and in both cases that could be both players, actually picks what gets hurt. But you can't take the leader counter itself as a casualty until all of its subordinate troops, the ones that are directly under it, have been removed. And you can't take the overall commander as a casualty until everything else has taken a casualty. Been taken as a casualty. Okay. Now, what do we have here? After that, if any mercenaries in that round of combat took any casualties, and the mercenaries are these guys over here, which come on board in these kind of uncontested spaces. If you have any mercenaries at all in your force, and they took any casualties, all your mercenaries, every nationality, leave the battle. At least they don't switch sides. All right. And what do we have here? Well, for each leader that you've taken as a casualty from this, you roll a die on the elimination chart, which should be here somewhere. I don't see it there. Here it is. No. Okay, you roll a die, you add the leader's rank to that die roll. And you'll get a result. Died, hey, they're out of the game. If there's another leader on the back side of them, as there are with all the French and British ones, you put the counter on the turn track associated with when that new leader will come in. Captured, they go over into the prison box. Routed, well, routed, they actually go off board into the routed leader box up here, which they'll be coming back next turn, assuming they're still alive. Okay. If you've entirely wiped out your enemy, or if both sides are wiped out, the battle's over. But after that, the non-aggressor is given the first option to run away at this point. Now, if you choose to run away, bad things can happen. It's like running away after a siege, except all the leaders that run away are disgraced. And that means that they're not going to affect control of areas later in the turn. That's the only real effect. And by the way, there's an interesting little fact. On all of these counters, there's like little quotes like from, in this case, what, Henry V? Or no, is that, yeah. A lot from Henry V, but just some interesting little things to add flavor to the game. Some of them are kind of amusing to read. Some of them are just a nice little bit of flavor for the period there. Okay, so if you choose to run away, you have to run away with everyone. You run like you would normally. Anything that can't run is captured. Hey, just like normal. And there's the disgrace markers. But there's more. When you're running away, the non-running person gets a free shot at you. And that free shot is at +1 to all the die rolls. Which means there's a good chance your army is going to be destroyed if you run. So sometimes you don't want to run just because it's too dangerous. Now, of course, if you're facing someone like Louis here, he's only got 1 die against you. He's not going to do a lot of damage in pursuit. Interesting. Okay. If neither side runs or is destroyed, then you just continue combat as it goes until somebody decides to leave or has that decision made for them through death. Okay. Now we go after all the rounds and after the combat, which comes after all those rounds. Now we go to determining control of areas. Control of areas is done in kind of a 2-step process. The first one is, if you have a leader who's not disgraced sitting in an enemy-controlled area, that area loses its control marker. That's pretty easy. The second stage is that you get control of areas that you have leaders in. Now, if it's your home area, that's pretty much automatic. But let me go over the process when it's not your home area and then show how mercenaries affect your home area. In the process when it's not your home area, you have to roll a die less than, and home area is determined by the shield. So for example, Louis comes from the Ile-de-France because the shield matches. Matilda comes from England. If she's there, she can conquer it. Okay. If you're not in your home area, though, you have to roll a die less than or equal to the number of stars, which means kind of lowly commanders have a really hard time converting areas to their side. And even kings aren't necessarily that good. And here's the deal, and this works with home area too. Just assume that you need a 6 as your base number. Anything 6 or less will work. Every mercenary you have subtracts 1 from the amount that you need. From your target number, as it were. So if Louis had 1 mercenary here in Picardy, he's got 3 stars. That puts him down 3 minus 1 for the mercenary to a 2. He would only capture it on a 1 or a 2. Let's say he's at home and he has that mercenary. Well, his base number is 6, so he would capture it on a 1 through 5 and retake it. Okay. Next step, raise troops and place mercenaries. Troops and mercenaries appear automatically in every controlled area. You get a number of troops equal to the troop value in the area. If you control the area, troops show up there. You may not get those troops, but they show up there. You do have some choice, though. You're allowed to raise knights or chevaliers. And let's see, that's one option. The knights can only be raised in England. The chevaliers can only be raised in Ile-de-France. And there's Burgundian knights, which can only be raised in Burgundy. If you control the area, you have the option to build one of your units as those. as a knight unit. Gunners, well, you can only raise those in areas with an area value of 3. There doesn't seem to be a limit on how many you raise. So if you get the first choice to raise, and I believe it's the non-initiative player who gets to raise first, you can raise all the gunners. May or may not be a good idea. The big reason for doing that is probably to deny them to your opponent rather than that they're all that useful, because they don't count in battle. They only count in sieges. Finally, there's longbowmen, and these are English and Welsh, and the English and Welsh longbowmen can be also built in their area. I don't see a limitation there, so I think you can raise 2 English longbowmen in the same area. At the same time, any mercenaries that have been removed from the board already show up in their home area. So for example, we have the Netherlands mercenaries. If they're not on the board, they show up here. Or if some of them aren't on the board, they show up there. Okay, we're going to have to come back for a second part of this because it's going to take a while. Okay, so now once the troops are on the board, you're allowed to deploy them. Basically, you can shift them around among areas that you control. You send them along a chain of areas that you actually already control. You can't skip areas, whatever. You're just funneling them there. The only exceptions are you can't cross obstructed boundaries, and only the English can travel over the water in this deployment. But otherwise, you can travel through any areas that have your control marker and set them up where you think they'll do you the best good. They're not aligned with any leaders at this point, and if you set them up poorly, you may end up giving them to an opponent who starts there, or who's, well, an opponent won't, a disgraced opponent might be in a location that you own already, so you might even be setting them up for them there if you're really silly. Okay. You can also recruit mercenaries. Recruiting mercenaries works very much the same way. You can pull mercenaries out of the area they're in and move them along a chain, either into an adjacent area you control or along a chain of controlled areas, but they have to end up with one of your leaders and they have to be able to fit with your leader. They stack with them. Now this is kind of this is a tricky part of the game because you have to make this choice of, do you want the mercenaries now, or do you have troops that you can claim? Might you lose those troops? One of the things to keep in mind here that helps a lot is being aware of which leaders are coming in the next turn. If enemy leaders are potentially enemy leaders, are showing up in an area, you might not get the troops. Because that depends kind of on who's the initiative player. And I think this is done in non-initiative order as well. Most of the troop collection is done in non-initiative order. The initiative player got the bonus of the extra impulse. I'm not sure which is the better thing. It depends on the phase of the game and what's going on and everything like that. Okay. Then we dispose of captured leaders. And that's the next segment here. What happens here is you're forced to exchange leaders. If both sides have a certain number of have captured leaders, you must try to make the deal that returns the most stars on a star-for-star basis to the opponent. So if I have one one-star leader and you have 2 of my one-star leaders, I have to exchange one of my one-star captured for one of yours. But if you have a 2-star leader and I have a 1-star leader, no exchange is possible. They have to be exactly even. If there's a dispute, if there's multiple choices of how to arrange the maximum number of stars transferred, the initiative player gets to make that choice. Then each player, starting I think with the initiative player, gets to ransom off his captured troops. So if you've got some of my troops captured, I can trade territories I control for my troops. I don't have to do this, but for every point of territory I control, I get a star of troops back. I don't get any change, Not sure how the change would work. We'll give you an island in the mid. Yeah. Okay. Now, the other thing that happens here is that victory points change hands. If you've got leaders still sitting in there, for every star of an enemy leader that you have, you get a victory point. So leaders are actually more valuable than territories in this. You'll see that when we count the victory points at the end of the turn, but the territories, 1 and 2 point territories, are only worth 1 victory point, whereas a 2-star leader is worth 2 victory points if he's captured. You still may not want to give him up because there are other advantages to owning territory than just victory points, but it is definitely a concern there. Alternatively, if you don't want to ransom, you can leave him in prison. I mean, he'll die eventually. You won't be paying forever. Okay. Speaking of death, it's the leader death check. You have to check every leader who's on the board, in the captured leaders box, or up in the routed leaders box. And you do that by comparing the turn the leader came on, which is indicated on the leader counter, and you'll see later leaders have later numbers, versus the current turn. So at the end of turn 1, all turn 0 leaders might just die on a 1. At the end of turn 2, all turn 1 leaders might die on a 1, and 0s on a 1 or 2. Eventually it gets to the point where you're guaranteed to die. You cannot live that way. There just is no option there. You're too old. And what's cool about that is, well, there's 12 turns in the game, and the leaders who came in turn 0 and started the board show up over here on what? Turn 6? Yeah. They show up as available on turn 6. Yes. After the leader death. Because the next phase is to place new leaders. And this is why your leaders don't die on the first turn they show up, because they're really not going to get to do anything. They just show up on the board. When you place new leaders, the first thing that happens is all the non-aligned leaders. And we have a couple of them on the board at the beginning of the game. We have Robert of Gloucester and David the First. What's cool about these is they come with either side. Now, that means one counter covers the leader twice, so there's no later leader on the side of the non-aligned leaders. All the non-aligned leaders that are either in the routed box or just coming into the game at this point, when you get prisoners released, they go from here into the routed box. So if you somehow either ransom or make a deal to get a non-aligned leader out, well, you may not get him. He's back in this non-aligned state. And what happens is, let's see, I think it's the initiative player picks first. No, the non-initiative leader player picks first. He chooses which one he wants, flips it to his side, and places it on the board. Now, when you place something on the board, you can place it in any friendly or neutral area, even if it's even if it controls enemy leaders. That includes non-controlled areas, so that they can grab mercenaries in a little bit. You could also place it in the leader's home area. If it's placed in an area with enemy leaders, and there's no aggression marker already there, then you place an aggression marker to indicate that you're the attacker rising up against them. And let's see what else. If you're placed in your home area, you get a number of regular infantry equal to your stars. Those are immediately assigned to your command. You're coming into play with in your own domain. Your own men-at-arms are going to support you. At this point also, if you don't have a king marker on the board, you have to place your king marker on one of your 3-point leaders. Unless, of course, you don't have a 3-point leader, in which case you are forgiven and don't have to place a king marker at all, which is a bonus. You do not want a king, but all the same, the king wants to be a king. Okay. Now, there's some... After the leaders have been placed for both sides, and you also place your aligned leaders, the ones that you were going to get automatically, you didn't have to wait on this. Those are placed, I believe, after the non-aligns. And then you get to dispose of the troops probably that were just generated on the board. Any leaderless troops. It's also possible that a leader died and left a bunch of troops behind, in which case there would be leaderless troops there that could be aligned. Starting with the non-initiative player, you take the troops in the area, as many as you like and can command. There's some restrictions here, though, that you got to remember. Only 3-star English or French leaders can command knights or chevaliers. They can command either English or French knights. That just indicates their origin. 2-star Burgundian leaders are also allowed to command Burgundian knights. But the 3-star French and English leaders can command any knights, including the Burgundians. French, English, or Burgundian. Alignment doesn't matter there. Black stripe leaders are never allowed to command anything except regular troops. So if it's a non-aligned leader, it doesn't matter what the rank is. I don't know if there are any Burgundian non-aligns that would actually make sense. They're still not able to command Burgundian troops, the chevaliers. And they're certainly not allowed to command gunners. Any troops that are left on the board after everybody's had their chance at them are removed. They're gone. And that's most of the mercenaries that, if they weren't taken. Now we do a scoring phase, and we go to this adjust the score segment. And this is kind of, victory points are why you're winning. So I'll go through these. Okay, if you control the opposite side's capital, i.e. if you're the French and you control England, if you're the English and you control the Ile-de-France, you get a bonus victory point for that right off the bat. Okay, that doesn't sound like much. All right, but for every area that you control with an area value of 3, you get 2 victory points, and that includes that one, so it's a 3rd victory point for that. For every area that you control with a 1 or 2 value, you get 1 victory point for. And these are points that you accumulate. Holding territories throughout the game generates a lot of points for you. If you killed any enemy 3-star leaders in battle, you get 2 victory points per leader. If you killed any other leaders, you get 1 point each. And these can actually be added right at the time that they happen. There's no reason to wait until the end of the game to do this, or turn to do this. If you kill the enemy king, you get a bonus victory point for that. And then here's the thing. Any leaders in your captured leaders box. See, yeah, this happens at the end of the turn. It doesn't happen after the captured leaders because you can allow leaders to die in there. If you leave leaders to rot without ransoming them, there's a chance they die and don't cost you anything. So this is phase 11. I got confused because the rule number and the phase number in the thing. Anyway, this is when the points are assessed, all the points. There's no reason not to assess the casualty points earlier, although you might want to pull them to the side and do it earlier. Okay, so if either player reaches the 30 victory point marker at the end of a turn, game's over, they won. If not, you go all 12 turns, and at the end of those 12 turns, whoever's got the victory point marker on their side wins. If the victory marker is over in the 0 box, nobody wins, game over. And you had a lot of fun playing, but you have nothing to claim. Alright, well, I'm going to go into the special scenario rules at the beginning of the first turn of the game. In the particular scenario we're hitting first line in winter, there's not going to be a lot of scenario rules for that. There's just worrying about the bowmen, I think. They got special restrictions there. And we got Robin Hood. Alright. So we'll load this one up and hopefully get started.